This evening, we're going to be here for about an hour this evening. I'm going to hand over to Molly Case, first of all, who's going to open the event with a reading. We're then going to have a reading from Romalyn Ante from her debut poetry collection, and then about 20 minutes of Romalyn and Molly in conversation. Hand over to Molly, first of all. Molly's a spoken word artist, writer and nurse, born and brought up in South London. And she currently works at St George's Hospital, London, as a cardiac nurse specialist. Molly's book, you may already know, How to Treat People, was out last year with Viking Penguin. So, Molly, over to you.
Hi, can everybody hear me? I've got all your glorious faces up in front of me. Yes, good. Firstly, can I just say good evening? It's so nice to see everybody there. And I have to confess, I am actually a Zoom virgin. So please excuse me if there's anything I'm doing that's strange, but hopefully Sarah will give me a nudge if I'm not doing anything right. In fact, it's really nice. Sarah, am I allowed to have this gallery view?
Yes, of course.
Good. I really like looking at you all rather than seeing my face, actually. I saw a lady in the top corner, fantastic, who literally, as we started, rolled up her sleeves and got her pen out as if she was literally ready. So I thought, yes, I want to see you all, actually. So before I introduce the wonderful Romelyn, I am going to perform a poem for you. This was Romelyn's request, this poem. You may have already heard it, but it's a pleasure to perform it this evening to you. So as Sarah said, I am working as a nurse in St George's in cardiac speciality, and I'm also busily writing. I've managed to get a day a week where I can busily write, which is rather heavenly. This is a poem that I wrote a long time ago, back in 2013, in support of all my wonderful healthcare colleagues who worked so hard when we were facing some tricky comments in the media. This was a kind of rallying cry for the love of my nurse colleagues and my healthcare colleagues, and it's called Nursing the Nation. A woman comes in too young to bear this. She's got a disease that will make her miss her daughter's wedding day, her first grandchild being born. How would that feel to have all that torn away from you? I can't answer that question. It's not my place to say, but I can tell you what we did for her, how we helped her get through the day. A cup of tea there and one for all her family as they came throughout the night. What a sight, there were loads of them, to help her fight the awful pain of it. Paying last visits, we wouldn't let them miss it. Farewell from her brother, last kisses with their mother, holiest love, love like no other. Maybe there's bad ones, no doubt that there are. But for this list I'm writing, we don't want the same tar brush crushing our careers before they've even started. How could you say this about people so big-hearted? Who would have thought we'd be having to defend? We don't do this for our families, we don't do this for our friends, but for strangers. Because this is our vocation, and we're sick and tired of being told we don't do enough for this nation. So listen to us. Hear us goddamn roar. You say we're not doing enough, then we promise we'll do more. This time, next time, there's nothing we can't handle. Even if you bring us down, show us scandal, scandal, scandal. You remember that man covered in burns head to toe? I don't think you do, because you're on that TV show, lip gloss kissed women on daytime TV, come into our world, see things that we see. One lady, passing, had no relatives to stay. We sang her to sleep, let angels carry her away. Were you there that day when we held her hand, told her nothing would harm her, that there was a higher plan? Saw her face as she remembered a faith she'd once held, watched her breath in the room as she finally exhaled. Why don't you meet us? Come, shake our hands, try to fit it in between having tea with your fans. Your hands are so soft and mine are cracked. Why don't you let us on air? Let us air the facts. We've washed and shrouded people that we've never known, pinned flowers to the sheets and told them they're still not alone, shown families to the faith room and watched them mourn their dead, then got back to work, bathed patients, made beds. Hindus, Muslims, Jews and Sikhs, Buddhists and Christians, and just people off the street. We've cared for them all. We love what we do. We don't want a medal, we just want to show you. So listen to us. Hear us goddamn roar. You say we're not doing enough, then we promise we'll do more. Thank you very much. So it is a great pleasure. Oh, that's nice. Clap, clap, clap. Oh, I like that. Yeah, oh, that's nice. How cool is this? We should do this more. It's now, to be honest, I've been looking forward to this so much. I've been reading Romalyn's collection on my commute. I'm back to commuting. I've been on maternity leave and I wasn't really looking forward to commuting because Corona and it's grim and things like that. And it has been an absolute pleasure for kind of the last 2 weeks to be, firstly, I read it cover to cover. I studied poetry at university and they talked about the science of putting a collection together. So I'm always really interested in reading how a poet has put the poems beside each other. So I read it cover to cover. And then the week before I dipped in and out because I think a lot of people read poetry in that way. And I was absolutely entranced. I was on the Northern Line southbound, except I wasn't. I was taken to the most incredible places. I was taken to the wards and I was taken to the hospitals, but I was taken to this incredible place, to Romalyn's home, and to all the people that she's met along the way. And it's written with such incredible sensitivity and tenderness, and it kind of glistens with the beauty that she evokes in both London and back home. And it was a real pleasure to be asked, a real privilege to be asked actually to do this Q&A, and I just can't wait to hear her read her poems, because I did ask her before we got started whether she would mind if I just told you a couple of the bits that I like, which I know, you know, maybe is not the thing to do, but I wrote down whilst I was on the tube bits that just, you know, those times when you listen to things, a bit like when I was learning guitar and I listened to Eric Clapton, so I thought, well, I should just stop playing guitar actually, because I'll never be as good as Eric Clapton. There were parts of this collection that were just so beautiful to me as a nurse, as a person, as a poet. There is a poem in the collection Antiemetic for Homesickness, where it's in the poem Repairing English, and she talks about a gentleman who is losing or who has lost his wife, and it's so simple and so onomatopoeic and grief laden in the sounds of the phrase, and it's very simple. She says, "A sofa bed clocks wide and sinks with the bolt of a man who anticipates the likelihood of grief." And it's so heavy. You can hear, I'm sure there's a lot of nurses here, you can hear him dragging out the overnight bed, the way it sounds, and what that actually means when you're staying overnight with somebody. I thought that was beautiful. And something again quite simple, actually, which we probably all know as healthcare workers. I know we're not all healthcare workers here. In Invisible Women, she says, "My mother walks to work when the sky is black and comes out from work when the sky is black." And I just thought it's so simple and so true of shift work. But before, let me not talk anymore, it is a great pleasure to introduce nurse and poet Romalyn Ante. She is going to read from her debut poetry collection this evening. We're going to talk about our mutual interests, but she, first of all, is going to do a performance of the poems in her collection, which is Antiemetic for Homesickness, which was out this year on Chatto and Windus, and it builds a bridge between two worlds, journeying from the country Na Nagluwal Seyo that gave birth to you to a new life in the UK, steeped in the richness of Filipino folklore and studded with Tagalog. The poems speak of the ache of assimilation and the complexities of belonging, telling the stories of generations of migrants who find exile through employment, through the voices of the mothers who leave and the children who are left behind. So I'm very excited. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you Romalyn Ante.
Thank you so much, Molly, and thank you for that wonderful, wonderful poem. I remember when I first watched that poem on YouTube, actually, and I was thinking, oh my God, finally, a nurse is writing about the experiences of nurses. And I thought that our voices, nurses' voices, carers' voices, medical professionals' voices need to be heard, even though it's not always the case. So the first poem that I'm going to read from my collection, Antiemetic for Homesickness, is called Invisible Woman. That's the poem that Molly briefly talked about a while ago. This poem really tries to explore what it means to do the things that you do as a carer, as a nurse, and still remain invisible in the eyes of the society, and also in the eyes of the general public and the people that sometimes you care for. Invisible women. You see them everywhere, these invisible women. One navigates the ache of a corridor, and the hour glints with a salvo of needles. A still intubating stylet enters a mouth like a forced prayer. On the news, an invisible woman fell asleep on the steering wheel and somersaulted into daybreak. Debris littering across the motorway. A splinter buries deeper. She speaks to her patient about his petunias, but doesn't mention the blooms of tumors on his endoscopy scan. They are everywhere, though some hazier than others. Flick through their passports to find only a page, their names and countries erased by sun rays. These invisible women, goddesses of caring and tending, but no one hears when their skulls pound like coconut shells about to crack. My mother walks to work when the sky is black, and comes out from work when the sky is black. Her footsteps leave a snowdrop-studded path. In the middle of a plaza, she poses, the downpour tricking her eyes to believe the statue in the square is a fellow invisible woman. Once, my mother cut through the blurred backs of men towards a gasping child and found a blade of grass fluttering in his throat. The air opened and she was gone. My mother and I are both nurses. So my mother came here to the UK from the Philippines back in 2002, 2003, and then 2 or 3 years after, the whole family followed. A lot of Filipinos are nurses, and I think it has become a joke that all Filipinos are nurses. Even Prince Philip commented once that the Philippines must be half empty. You're all here running the NHS. And even though it sounds like a joke at first, there's a sad truth in it. You know, many families break apart because they have to go away. They have to work abroad to provide a better life for their families back home. And that's what happened to my family and my mom. And even though this book is not 100% autobiographical, I attempt to paint a picture of the community and the career that I love, the community in which I grew up. So the next poem that I'm going to read is called Notes Inside a Balikbayan Box. A Balikbayan box is a care package. What we do, overseas Filipino workers, we spend a fraction of our monthly wage on little gifts, and then we put it inside a balikbayan box. Once full, we send it to our families back home in the Philippines. And every year there are thousands, 10,000s of balikbayan boxes that go back to the Philippines. So clearly this is not unique to me. This experience is not unique to me. It happens to so many families, so many children receive balikbayan boxes every year, and sometimes twice a year or so. When I was a child and my mom was in the UK, she used to send us balikbayan boxes, and I used to be really excited to think that, oh, my mom thought of us because she spent all this money for all these gifts to put inside the balikbayan box. And that made me happy somehow. But thinking about it as well, reflecting on it now, it makes you think how material things can be used to replace something that is not really replaceable by material things, and how many more transnational families experience this kind of experience. Balikbayan can be translated as repatriate or to send back home. Notes inside a balikbayan box. Dear son, in my place, here is a balikbayan box. Here are the LeBron James rubber shoes, size 9, and the video game tapes to replace all the palm cakes I owe you for every simbang gabi I could not attend. I promise I'll be there for Christmas. I know I've been saying this for a decade now. Find the E45 cream for your grandma's tissue dry skin, a stack of incontinence pads and tubes of barrier bombs. Between you and me, every time I roll old people onto their sides and lift their knees to their chest for suppositories, I ask myself, who does this for her? Tell Tita to leave her husband, her school sweetheart whose mistresses are Mahjong and Sabong. Tell her not to bear the stink of his armpits. In the box, find the Gucci Bloom perfume and Scar creams. Tell her I haven't forgotten our vows when we were young and our fingers smelled of lihing mi candies. Our walang iwanan oath to never leave each other. Dear son, in my place, here is a balikbayan box. Rip all the packaging tape. Every gift inside is yours. Work your hands hard until there's nothing left. Learn that to survive, we must have strong arms. To carry a tray full of medicine and not let one drop. To push a hyperventilating woman with speed and care to the maternity wing. To lift and sit a skin and bone man down on his chemo chair. To gauge the weight of a rose before you lay it onto a coffin. Take this box inside our house. That is all I ask you to carry for now, my son. I was 12 when my mother first left us to work abroad as a nurse. In 2018, when I was starting to write the book, well, I was in the middle of writing the book, I've learned that every year in the Philippines, there are 9 million left behind children. So children who are also left behind by their parents, whether their parents work abroad as nurses, as nannies, as seafarers. So different jobs, different professions, really. And reflecting on that status of transnational families, I really feel some kind of mixed feelings about the whole situation. At one point, I'm happy because parents are doing something that's very honorable. You know, they choose to sacrifice their relationship with their family just to provide a better life for them. But also, on the other hand, I feel quite sad because even though these parents are able to provide financial support to their families, it's quite lonely that the emotional support is not always there and the relationship breaks as a result. So the next poem that I'm going to read is called Anagolay. Anagolay is a mythological goddess of the Philippine mythology. Anagolay is the goddess of lost things in Philippine mythology. When I was writing this book, I realized that actually my mom, Filipinos, even me, we're all losers. We need to have a prayer to Anagolay somehow. Because if you think about it, my mom left the country to work as a nurse. She lost her family. She lost her country. And then she lost our relationship. There's a break in that relationship for many years. But also as a nurse, you lose your relationship with your patients, whether they pass away or when they go to back to their houses or to wherever, you're a loser. So I guess this poem is my attempt to to explore what kind of losers we are. Okay, and I go live. Need to find it actually. Okay. Also, this poem is it's recited from the perspective of a mother. Anagolay. I do not ask for divine reappearance. Let the misplaced objects recede in the heat of an isolated island, where sunlight snakes across the underwater sand. Let the lost things grain the night sky, against the blurred edges of Milky Way. I had traveled so far I could no longer hear the waves heaving onto a shore, accessible only through below the towers of limestone rocks, where a gap closes like a promise at high tide. Anagolay, help me find a torch pen in the peril of a drug trolley. Help me retrieve the will of my patient who pushes all pills aside with the back of a hand. Guide me, for I have walked against the wind that is always homeward. For I return to find my own children tread past me, as if I were a palm tree thrashed by thunderstorms. Goddess of lost things, today a space council names an asteroid after you, and tonight another world ebbs, a punctured lung. A torch ticks on, its beam leads to my children's sand-speckled feet. Let me look up to remember. The fifth vital sign has always been pain. Let me find a prick of light gliding like a plane. Or if not, the rhythm of a shockable heart. Okay. A part of being a migrant worker, a migrant nurse, or any, a part of being a migrant is that you have to accept that actually this is the place that I'm leaving now, and I gotta know their ways. I got to know the English ways of living, of speaking, of being, and a part of learning is also unlearning of yourself and unlearning somehow of your past. So when I was when I came here, I had to improve my English, and one of the things that somebody commented on me, and this only happened last year, so it's still quite new. My English is not perfect. So what happened last year was somebody commented on the way I speak, because in my sentences I kind of punctuated it with like. You know how the new generation is speaking right now. They always say, "Oh, I went to the park and like I saw my friend and like we had some like noodles." So we always have this like, although this is not, I'm sure that this is not intentional. And I think in my case, it's more of a sentence filler, or when somebody is quite nervous, that's the way they speak. When I came to this country, my number one concern was not to speak proper Queen Elizabeth English. My number one concern really is to create a new life for myself and for my family. Because in the Philippines, one of the things that I remember is we really had a bad life. We're not really poor, but we were just getting by. And one of the things that I could not forget is that instance when my grandmother had to have a dialysis treatment because of kidney failure, and she couldn't afford it. We couldn't afford it. And then, so when I came here, my first priority is to create a good life for myself and for my family, thinking of the memory of my grandmother and not to speak 100% English. As long as you understand me, I understand you. That's that's okay for me. But then it's quite difficult to know that, or to realize for me that even though the world of linguistics is quite expandable, and it's still expansive and it's still expanding, considering that we all come from different walks of life, that we all come from different generations who have different way of communicating. The difficult thing about it, or the saddening thing about it, is that we still need to revert back to the Queen's English, the proper English. And I guess repairing English is my way of talking back to the empire. Repairing English. You cautioned me against using like, told me the stink of shrimp paste was sickening, like ridiculous. What is ridiculous? My true being, or my sentences tripping over likes? I want to find meaning, so I Google like, and learn it is an extensible word. Then I Google extensible. A sofa bed clockwise and sinks with the bulk of a man who anticipates the likelihood of grief. His wife's bluing lips. When I say I don't like the cold, I don't mean the snowstorm seen from this floor of a hospital window, the wear of a white-out godlike. I think of my Nanay Lola, who couldn't afford dialysis. Every time I say getting sick in my country is like suicide. On a jeepney to Manila, she yanked out a butterfly knife and turned it on a man who was pulling her purse. When I say I don't like the cold, I only miss the likes of our summer, when our ground flares with ginger lilies. But whenever I close my eyes, I see Nanay Lola, and the man whose blood was gushing out of his waist, like Nanay Lola had drilled a faucet into it and left it open. The last poem that I'm going to read is the title poem of the book, Antiemetic for Homesickness. But I just want to thank you all for coming, and thank you for supporting this event. Thank you, Molly, for reading that beautiful poem. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you. Thank you to the RCN, Sarah and Francis. Thank you very much. Antiemetic for homesickness. When my mother left, I had a bad feeling about it. That I kind of had a hard feeling, or hard feelings towards her, because I was thinking, how could you leave us? How could you take care of other people and forget to take care of your own family? When I came to the UK, I live in Wolverhampton. I thought, I shouldn't have said that in my head to about my mother, because the truth is my mother sacrificed a lot. If I felt bad for losing a mother, she must have felt bad for losing her whole family in a way for many years. And also, especially when I came to the UK, I was like, surely my mom is so homesick. And I really got that feeling of understanding of how being away from your home country gives you terrible loneliness and some sort of sadness. I mean, look at the weather, for example. It's very different from from the weather in the Philippines, So while I was partying at the beach, my mom is, I don't know, helping someone else in this kind of weather. So I guess this poem is my attempt to explore what do we do as migrant workers, as migrants, to recreate the sense of belonging, even though we're far away from home, and what kind of things make us more stronger to survive and to thrive in the new country that we are in now. Antiemetic for homesickness. A day will come when you won't miss the country na nagluwal sa'yo. You'll walk on gritted streets, light snow shoaling you like a mother's warmth. A vertigo of distant lights will not deceive you. Bury all the kisses of yesterday in the fold of your handkerchief. The illuminated star-shaped lanterns, the tansan tambourines. But keep the afternoon your father sold his buffalo to rent a jeepney to take you to the airport. The driver who spat out phlegm with the trajectory of a grasshopper that lands on the ground. Keep the list you wrote the night before you left. A promise to not return till you become somebody. Keep the cassette tapes, your children's voices shrill as the edges of winter stars. Keep the booklet of Our Lady of Perpetual Help in your uniform pocket, powder blue like her robe. Say the rosary. Feel each kamagong bead. Rest on a pillow to sense the rise and fall of your husband's chest. Listen to Tagalog songs. They will help you sleep through the cold scratches of December. Here is the tea-stained smile of a kababayan who invites you to a party. Go! No matter how heavy the day has been, and how many corpses you have carried within. Enjoy the home-cooked pancit guisado, the roasted pig's head, the blood-red apple in its mouth. A day will come when you won't need an antiemetic for homesickness. You will accept the patient's relative who always buzzes for a commode, the search for the missing boot of an A&E habitué, the village drunk. You will learn to heal the wounds of their lives and the wounds of yours. Love even the smoke of a Brummy accent on your face. So, here is the karaoke mic. Sing your soul out until there's El Niño in your throat, and you can drink all the rain of Wolverhampton. Thank you. Thanks.
It's just beautiful, isn't it? Thank you so much, Roma. That is such a pleasure to listen to you. And I guess it's the case when you hear somebody speak, it's a bit like when I listened to recordings of Sylvia Plath for the first time and I'd read her poetry for so long. When you actually hear somebody speak the poems they've written, it takes on something else, doesn't it? It was lovely to read your comments, everybody there, about accents and also about hearing your own personal take on the poem and what it brings to it. In fact, I really enjoyed the one that you read. I'd read it quite a few times, Notes Inside a Balikbayan Box, and I hadn't understood it quite in the way that you, so it's just lovely to hear you speak your own poems, of course. So we don't have so much time, and I'm sure all of us would be happy to stay on here longer, but you know, we can't. I have got some questions. It's just so beautiful, thank you. So I actually think, you know, I'd like to simply know how you got interested in writing poetry. Where do you draw your inspiration from? How long have you been writing poetry? So just tell us about your journey into writing poetry.
I guess I've always been writing since I was a child, since I was probably 12. And at first I was writing poetry in Tagalog, my mother tongue. I'm not from a literary background, so I didn't have any training in creative writing. The highest qualification I have is GCSE English. So I guess my influences really came from the rich background that I had as a Filipino and as a migrant. When I was growing up, I remember my mother telling me stories of her adventures. She worked first in Oman in the desert, and there's a lot of stories there. Then she went to the United Kingdom So I guess I have that narrative energy from her,
Yeah.
especially also from my grandfather who took care of us. Because what happens is when a child is left behind, normally they're left behind to their to the other parent, which in my case is my dad. But because my dad was also working from in a different city far away from our hometown, we were left to the care of our grandparents. And I remember my granddad telling us stories, folktale narratives, myths and legends. And also, most especially, when my dad comes and he call everyone, like in the neighborhood, they'll be singing songs, playing their guitars. And I guess that's how I learned the music of things. That's how I started loving the
Yes.
music, the rhythm of poetry. So even though I'm not from the literary background, I came from a different, I guess, rich background as well. And I'm really, really thankful of that. Only when I came here and then I started reading poetry in English more often that I became to write more rigorously.
So there's two questions really from your answer there that I'd like to pick up on. I mean, there's such lyricism in the poems. Because I'm a spoken word poet primarily, it's lovely to kind of feel the words in my mouth, and something in particular with, I'm very ignorant and speak one language. And in that ignorance, there's also something lovely about not necessarily understanding what the words mean, but feeling and hearing how they sound. There's something lovely in that. And I want to ask you about language. But first of all, you've spoken a lot about things that are left behind, things that are people that leave other people behind, or like the book, there's things there. And I think that when I was writing my book, How to Treat People, I thought about that a lot, because I was writing about my dad, who's in his 80s, and what he has passed down to me. He's still living, but what he's passed down to me, and what I will then pass down. And I think you draw upon that a lot. And without kind of going off on too much of a tangent, I wanted to ask you a little bit about, you talk about blood a lot in your poetry, and blood is these beautiful gemstones, then there's sinful blood, and then the wallpaper is warmed as a bag of blood-soaked faces, there's blood everywhere. And I just wondered, to make the question a bit more simple, what blood kind of represented in the collection? Is it simply how you experience blood as a nurse, the visceral blood, or is there something in bloodlines and what is passed down to you? For me, in my book, I come from a Jewish background, not a religious background, and when I talked about blood in my memoir, very much like you, the visceral blood, it meant so much more to me about Jewish blood and lineage and things like that. And I just wondered how you see blood in your collection.
I think that's a very beautiful question, Molly. Thank you for that. You're spot on there, because we as nurses, we're very familiar with the image of blood, with the texture of blood, with the temperature of blood. And because my book is trying to explore not only my nursing background, not only the backgrounds of or the history of Filipino nurses, but also my own heritage, I do look at blood as two ways. One is blood nurse, that is medical, that is visceral, and that is nursing related, and one that is blood that is connected to your heritage, to your clan, to your language, to your culture. The interesting thing about blood is, as we know, blood carries oxygen, which supplies the whole of the body. Blood is actually the giver of life. Without oxygen, we'll be dead. But for me as well, blood, in terms of heritage and culture, they provide and preserve life for us as well. And that's very important for me to identify and to explore in this book. So there's a lot of familial relationships in the book. There's a lot of heritage, in a way, that beliefs that are passed down, or things that are passed down. And it's really important for me. I was really interested when you briefly talk about your memoir, How to Treat People, which I'm currently reading, and I'm really enjoying it. And I just feel that there are some certain images there that you describe beautifully, like how the petals fell on the ground and they look like shells on the beach. I think that's really evocative and really great. And I think in relation to your question, I actually want to ask you about this, just to expand it a bit, because we as nurses, we do relate to people of different background. In a way, we take a little bit from them, whether that's their own blood, literally blood, their blood when we take bloods for blood samples or whatever, or their own heritage and their own story. And I wanted to ask you if your profession as a nurse influence your art or the way you write or the way you see your art, or vice versa. Does your poetry influence your profession as a nurse?
I think that's a really good question, and I'm sure you've been asked the same. A lot of people say, "Oh, are you constantly kind of penning poems when you're at work?" And the answer to that is absolutely not. I don't know if it's the same for you. When I'm at work, my brain is utterly at work, objective, talking to patients. I never have a moment where I go, "Oh gosh, there's a certain cadence to the way that person has thrown." No, but in terms of your fundamental question of does work influence, absolutely. I mean, in particular, so I had a poetry collection out a few years ago, and the patient that I wrote that when I was a student nurse, and I don't know how you found your student day, but they were incredibly formative for me, and I think that's because they had to be. And now that I'm slightly more confident in my role as a qualified nurse, I guess perhaps you're absorbing a bit less every day, whereas when you're a student, you are just everything you're taking on. And so my collection, I think, my poetry collection, absolutely, the conversations that I was having, the experiences that I was seeing, the smells of things in the operating theatre, the hands that I was holding, the stories people were telling me. But I don't know about you, I would never go home and write these poems. They would sit in my head and kind of marinate there. And often it would be just a simple phrase that would stay with me. So I called that collection Underneath the Roses, where I remembered everything, which is a bit long-winded, but it was an old chap who, it reminds me in the collection actually, where he pulls out the mattress, the clack of the mattress. It was an old guy who was losing his wife and was staying the night, and she told me a story where she'd fractured her wrist in the garden one time, and she called out for her husband, but he was utterly deaf in his old age, and she lay out there underneath the roses remembering 60 years of their marriage, and she was happy even though she was in pain. So that phrase has always stayed with me. So absolutely it influences, and I'm sure you get asked the same. I'll ask you the same. How do you pen your poems? Do you have a little scribble at work, or do you take it home or on the commute?
I think we're quite similar. For anything else, thank you for the beautiful story. It's very wonderful. It's quite interesting how this conversation opens up to our experiences, personal experiences. I think because nursing, when I studied nursing, I took a diploma of higher education in nursing. It wasn't a Bachelor of Science before, but now if you want to study nursing, you have to take the Bachelor of Science. And I think that's very true, that nursing should be a Bachelor of Science, but also I feel that our profession should be a Bachelor of Arts, or both of them. It's both Bachelor of Science and Arts, because in nursing, like you said, we are trained how to pay attention to our patients, to the stories that they tell, to even like the pills that we put in their pot. Is this the right pills? I mean, I have two pills here. One is, two pills, two different pills, but the same color. Which one is which? And normally the nurse would know which one is which. And that's the art of paying attention. And I think that both in nursing and in poetry, we have to pay attention. One of my favorite poets, Li Yang Li, he said that poetry is like the score of the human voice. So in order for me to create a narrative in the book that is a narrative from different voices, from a mother's voice who left the family, from a left behind child, from other migrant workers, then I needed to pay attention to my own thoughts, to the thoughts of, or to the stories of my community, of my mother. And that's how poems start for me. I don't necessarily keep a notepad with me. I only have my handover notes in my pocket. That's all. But I remember one or twice when I was interacting with a patient and I had a poetic idea, an idea for poetry, and I just had to scribble it on the back of a handover sheet. But that rarely happens. It has to sit down in and permeates my brain first before it can turn into poetry. And once I write, I just free write first, and then the editing would come after. And also I would think about the form that I use, because I feel that the heart of the poem, the narrative, and the story of the poem is the soul. It's like a soul of the human body. But I need a human body. I need a vessel, and the form of the poem is my vessel for me. So that's really how my process is like.
Yeah, that's great. I love that you've spoken about form, actually, because I think there's two arguments for poetry, which is simply free writing and getting your right ideas down and not frightening any people here that are desperate to write poems and then go, oh gosh, do I need to be writing in a form? But I also am a big fan of having a form. I think it can, like you say, that's so lovely, so that it's the soul of the poem. I know we're not great for time, but maybe I could ask two more questions. And this is a question I've just thought of now. Cool. Which would be to anybody on here who is a budding poet or already a poet. Just you talking about your love of form is so nice. I've got a love when I write poetry or spoken word poetry of rhyme. Rhyme actually, for a lot of people, probably maybe people think it's a bit twee, but actually it really helps me move along a story that I'm telling, and actually expand on the story. But I wondered if you had any advice or tips and tricks to people who are really keen to start penning their own poems, but perhaps are a bit nervous of a blank page. What advice would you give to them?
I think it was really important for me to know who am I writing for and where I am writing from. And I guess those are the two questions that I often ask myself whenever I feel jaded, when I feel like I can't write it, this English is too hard, or I can't express myself properly, this is not the right way, or I'm sure there's a grammatical error here that I can't see, or maybe my English readers wouldn't appreciate it, maybe they think it's so simple, or it might be so straightforward. But I just go back to the question, why do I do this? Who am I writing for? Obviously, I'm writing for my own self. No matter how selfish it kind of sounds like, I'm writing most especially for my mother, because I really want to shed light on her own stories, on the stories of Filipino workers, Filipino nurses. I'm writing for the community that I belong, the nursing community, the Filipino nurses community, especially here in Wolverhampton. I always hear stories that are familiar to me, things that have happened to us. We have worked so many long day shifts. We have said yes to extra shifts because we were the only staff that's left in the ward. So we work hard, but then how many people actually know our story? And when I say our story, our real story, the reason why we left the country, it's not because we wanted to take anyone's jobs, it's more than that, and it's much deeper than that. And that's why I write, and those are the people to whom I'm writing. And also, where am I writing from? That's important, because I'm writing from a perspective of my true self. So I can't fake my poetry. I can't, because it will show. So if you want to write poems, then write it with sincerity.
I always say that, Roma. I always say when I perform a poem, even if it's a poem from a long time ago, I say, I take a minute, I remember what I felt when I wrote it, where it came from, and I always say I have to feel it, otherwise it feels fraudulent. I know it's not going to come out right. So I think that's, we've got a lot of similarities here. I think I will ask one more question, although I've got so many that I'd like to ask, but I think you've alluded to this so many times, and I think it wouldn't be right not to give this a voice, although your collection also does this, and I think that's so important. But as you said, there's such an incredible Filipino workforce here in the UK, in particular in nursing. I think none of us can miss that. I've worked with so many Filipino colleagues with their own individual stories of leaving behind family members, and I think it's so incredible what you're doing to give your community a voice. I'm sure they're incredibly proud of you back home and here. And I just wondered, you talked about that, was it Prince Philip or Prince Andrew? It's in your book.
Prince Philip.
Prince Philip, sorry, I don't really know about the royal. Should probably, Royal College of Nursing. Sorry, guys. I just wanted you to, if you could kind of give a message to the government or the people, the health secretary or all the Brexity people that are making this is a bit political, sorry guys, making our UK not feel quite as welcoming as perhaps it was, or certainly changed. I want you to have a voice and kind of say, how does it feel to be working here in the UK, and what would you like to be different? What would you like the government to do? Perhaps not just clap for us all, maybe something more, maybe not.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question as well. And I mean, we can speak about this for ages. Filipino is the third most common nationality of NHS staff. Obviously, English are the top, then the Indians, and then the Filipinos. Filipinos are one of the strongest pillars of the Philippines economy because of the remittances that we send back home, and only the backbone of the NHS. Even in the US, 4% of nursing staff are Filipino. It is big considering that Filipinos make up only 1% of their population. So just those stats there show you how big a Filipino community abroad is, especially community of nurses. When I write, I don't really think about writing to give my community a voice, but I feel like I'm one of those voices. So it's not that I am the voice for them, but I am a voice with them. And I feel that, I guess I wouldn't just say it to the government, because it's quite going to be expensive. But for me, what I felt was, when this COVID happens, the public, the society, the government choose to shed a light on us, through this clapping and heroes, NHS heroes. And then after that, we kind of died down again. So with my poem, Invisible Woman, sometimes it's not really about who you choose not to look at. Sometimes it's more about your choice. So as a person, you have that choice. Look at us, here are stories. Find out more about us. It's not about what society tells you to do. It's your own personal choice. And I guess my message would rather be for other migrant workers, my colleagues, and to be honest, all nurses, all healthcare professionals. I think that I'm just lucky, and I feel very honored to be a nurse, because I see such profession of huge respect, huge honor, really, and somehow they're not acknowledged as much as we want them to be.
Yeah.
But behind all this, after the spotlight is turned off, we know that nurses did a lot for society, and that's all that matters. So my message would be for the nurses and for the healthcare workers, and I just want to thank you and to say that I'm proud to be a nurse. I really am.
That's lovely, Roma. That's lovely. So am I, and proud to finally meet you as well. It's been a pleasure.
It's been amazing hearing from you both, and hearing you read out your beautiful poems, Roma. And don't forget that you can order antiemetic for homesickness online. So thanks once again, and thanks to everyone for all the lovely comments and ideas and thoughts that you've been sharing in the chat throughout this evening as well.